Diana, thank you so much for joining us for this crucial discussion on the fate of Ukraine and its territories currently under Russian control.
First of all, allow me to thank you for the invitation.
Okay, so let me first introduce you to our viewers. Diana Panchenko is a Ukrainian journalist who has been vocal and critical of President Zelensky and his handling of the war against Russia. We have spoken to her before and discussed allegations regarding corruption, elections and Istanbul negotiation talks, and also the infamous Oval Office meeting with Trump and J.D. Vance in February. Today, however, negotiations have taken a new turn. Trump has already met with Putin in Alaska, and following there was a meeting of Trump and Zelensky again in the Oval Office, which was far more cordial than the previous encounter. Now I want to start by asking you, what do you think as a Ukrainian citizen and a journalist of the idea of your country giving up its territories to end the conflict?
Anu, once again, thank you very much for the invitation. And first and foremost, I would like to try and explain that we regular Ukrainian people have our own thoughts about this situation. And I would like to draw several parallels. Imagine that in India, you have a group of armed, poorly educated people who intimidate the rest of the country. And then another country starts financing this armed group, and everyone who disagrees with them are put into prison. And this is more or less what is happening in Ukraine right now, when a group of people enriching themselves from the war are taking hostages the rest of Ukrainian people. I am very grateful for your interest towards the opinion of regular people and regular journalists. Thank you for giving me an opportunity to speak, because the narrative that we get to hear in the mainstream media frequently varies greatly from what is actually happening in Ukraine. You can take a look at the regular footage we get from Ukraine that show forceful mobilization of Ukrainian men. Just today we had a horrible footage showing drunk Ukrainian military officers attacking a family with young children in a car, and they were praying that their father is not mobilized forcefully. And that kind of cases happen every day, and this is the most clear illustration of what Ukrainians think about this war. Today, there seem to exist two parallel realities. I was watching the talks yesterday, and I felt as if I was watching a surreal art house movie, because there is true, real politic, as we call it, real politic, and the situation on the ground. And the situation is that Ukraine is losing its territory every single day, losing its people, and Ukrainian economy is getting weaker every day. I will name just one number. Per day, around 1,500 Ukrainians are fleeing the country, and that doesn't include the deceased and killed. This is the official data shared by the officials. 500 people killed every day, that's the official statistics. And about half of the people mobilized are simply fleeing the country. They are forced to flee the country. And you have to add the ones being killed and injured and taken hostages. That's the situation. People do not want to participate in this war. And we understand that either Ukraine has to undertake some compromises, and most probably, in one way or another, Ukraine will not be able to bring back Donbas and lost territories. And most probably, the armed forces of the Russian Federation will reach the borders of Luhansk and Donetsk, but there is only one potential trade-off. Either Ukraine is to sacrifice even more people, or it is to undertake some compromises right now and save more lives. The problem is that today Zelensky has virtually usurped the power. We haven't had presidential elections, his presidential term expired, but he never asked Ukrainian people what we want. We are deprived of our rights. And all Ukrainians were carefully watching negotiations yesterday with fear and pain. We were praying that it goes well. And what about the current expectations? Can we expect peace? We hopefully want peace, we pray for peace, but we understand that the situation is extremely fragile, because there are so many people who are willing for this war to be continued. Those are people in power. This is Zelensky and his surrounding. Regular Ukrainians want peace to come as soon as possible. Once again, there are two parallel realities. Ukrainian people live in one reality, the Ukrainian politicians exist in a different reality. And at least now we hear more and more vocal voices for peace being heard, and it's great that you and your colleagues address this issue. The words spoken by President Trump expressed yesterday are great, and we're praying for peace every day.
You say that if certain land is not compromised, then there will be more killings. But isn't that the case that if suppose 4 more regions are given to Putin, to Russia, Luhansk, Donetsk, Zaporizhia and Kherson, won't it be like a ladder for his ambitions? Because he's only buying more time, and this could possibly be to invade the whole Ukraine.
Well, Anu, unfortunately, I can't read the minds of President Putin, and I can't even imagine what he may want. But the one thing I do know is that the main reason for this war is a four-letter word, and this word is NATO. If Ukraine remained neutral, and that was stated in the Constitution of Ukraine in 1991, when Ukraine was established as an independent state, if it followed its constitution, the war could have been avoided. You live in a strong, big country in India. India is protecting its national interest in one way or in another. And large countries like India, China, the United States and Russia are obviously protecting their national interests as well. It's just that those countries are very big and powerful, and that's the real politics. And Ukraine is the largest country in Europe. It has a lot of population, and obviously Ukraine also had to defend its national interests, but also take into account what is happening in the world. And it's quite obvious that the political course chosen by Ukraine to join NATO was a suicide. It's just how the world functions. Imagine if you have a disease, diabetes, you obviously would not be eating sweets. You would know that this is dangerous for you. Likewise, for Ukraine, it was dangerous to play around the idea of joining NATO. And from the very beginning, everybody knew that Ukraine would never be allowed to join NATO. De jure, Ukraine will never join NATO. De facto, we've been there before, and there are so many confirmation to that. There are CIA databases at the border with Russia and the whole preparation of Ukraine for this war. Just yesterday, President Trump was saying that Ukraine will never become a NATO member. Just think how cynical it is towards Ukrainian people. Ukrainian people was promised that Ukraine will become a member of NATO to protect it from Russia. Well, I would say it's exactly due to Ukraine's desire to become a NATO member that started this war. Definitely, I cannot speak for the Russian side. I obviously cannot predict what Putin is going to do. But I do understand that there are some objective factors. And just like India is defending its national interest, similarly, Russia defended its national interest. And Ukraine had to take into account and protect good neighborly relations with everyone. Poland, Hungary, now Hungary is also no longer a friend, and also Russia and Belarus. That is why I believe we obviously can say that we have to protect our land, that it would be wrongful to cede our lands and territories. But again, there is a real situation on the ground, and this is what we have in reality. One more important point that people tend to forget about, and this is also very cynical. Starting from 2014, Ukrainian authorities have been stating that they want to bring Donbas back. I'm sure we've heard that former President Poroshenko saying that. But what makes it very cynical is that nobody ever wanted to bring Donbas back. Because Donbas, quote marks, is the wrong electorate. Those are the people who will never vote for the authorities and for the official authorities in Kiev. And today, I'm more than confident in the presidential office, in the office of Zelensky, everyone understands that nobody is going to bring these people back, because those are the people who will never vote for the current authority. I've been to Donbas, I've been to Donetsk, I've been to Mariupol, I've visited the front line after the events of the March 2022, and I talked to regular people there on the ground, and I heard horrendous stories from them, and regular people who lived there and survived through those episodes, from the villages who would be in the control of Ukraine, then Russia, then back Ukraine, then back Russia. Virtually none of those people were saying that there is some political will that they want to express. All they wanted is for that to be over. They wanted the war to be over. They want their children and grandchildren enjoy peaceful life and not hiding in the basement from all the shellings. So the trade-off we're facing is whether Ukraine will exist as a state or will cease to exist. So it's not a choice whether we will lose 4 territories or 6 territories. The situation is that either Ukraine ceases to exist as a sovereign country, or potentially, if the peace talks do take place, Ukraine will survive. That's it.
So a poll by The Guardian is also suggesting that 75% of Ukrainians don't want to give up their land. If hypothetically speaking, Ukraine gives up the land, won't there be possibility of a revolution like 2013 before Crimea was annexed?
Well, first of all, I would like to encourage you not to trust the social polls result that may be depicted somewhere in the media. Today in Ukraine, there is no freedom of speech as such, and all the social and opinion polls and surveys that we may hear of are severely biased. And most importantly, many Ukrainians are simply afraid to openly answer to those polls and surveys. Here in my list, in my hands, I have a list of political prisoners prepared by my team. It's more than 400 names on this list, and those are the names that have been officially validated by my team. And people on this list are people who simply posted something on social media and were prosecuted for that, or those are people who encountered severe shellings and encouraged their neighbors to join in to protect them from the shellings, and they are being convicted of state treason. Or there are people who continued working in the banks in the state of Kherson when Ukraine took over the territory, and again, they're being convicted of state treason for doing that. People are severely intimidated. You can't even imagine the level of dictatorship that is happening in Ukraine right now. Men are afraid to go out on the street, and their mothers and their wives are taking care of them, going to work, because they're afraid that they would be forcefully sent to the front line. So any results of the opinion surveys that we see are out of tact with reality. So everyone who's against negotiations are either people sitting in Spain in immigration. They are safely sitting in Spain telling that Ukraine should continue the war, or those are the people who are monetizing the war. Those are direct surroundings of Zelensky, his friends, or people working for him, the so-called volunteers or military officers who are being directly paid by the current authorities. And there is a huge amount of embezzlement happening through the war. This is the huge case of embezzlement in human history. Not a single war has ever brought so much enrichment to the people directly benefiting from that. And just lately, the Member of Parliament of Ukraine, an opposition Member of Parliament, stated that the United States have information. President Trump has information. Just lately, Zelensky and his team has tried to take $50 billion out of Ukraine in cryptocurrency. And this is just one single instance, just one case, and there are many more cases like that. So I can tell who are those people objecting to negotiations and peace talks. Those are people who have migrated from Ukraine and no longer care, or people from the Zelensky team embezzling themselves from war. But those are not 25%. I would say that's probably 0.5%. And the absolute majority are either terribly intimidated, openly saying that they're tired of this war and all they want is peace. And I see that from the huge amount of letters and emails I receive and all the comments I read in my social media. And undoubtedly, I constantly talk to people from Ukraine, from different corners of Ukraine, and all of them want one thing: they want it to be over.
Okay, so now let's break down the negotiations from Trump and Putin's Alaska summit. Putin and Trump arrive in Alaska together. They step out of their respective planes together, shake hands. Next, there are photo ops, and then they leave for the talks in Trump's presidential car, that is the Beast. So now in all of this show of strength, didn't both the leaders signal that Russia is like having an upper hand on the negotiation talks and that Trump is clearly siding with Putin?
Well, I guess President Trump is primarily taking the side of the United States, and he's acting based on the protection of the interests of the United States. President Trump understands very well how much money was embezzled and stolen over the last 3 years. And this is the money from the pockets of the American taxpayers. $300 billion were provided as financing and financial aid by the United States to Ukraine. And I know for sure that hundreds of billions of US dollars were embezzled. I don't think it is in the interest of the USA or Trump to continue financing Zelensky and his team. According to my information, the financing and sanctions against Zelensky and his team are on the table for Trump. And I guess the fact that those sanctions are no longer in force are still due to the attempts of President Trump to facilitate peace talks. Also, President Trump is supporting real politics. He understands what is happening on the ground. And going into war with a nuclear power was a very bad idea from the beginning, Anna. And even if we imagine, even if we theoretically imagine that Ukraine is aiming for the borders it had in 1991. And even if we imagine that Ukraine is going to the borders of Russia, we've seen that once in Kursk, then Russia would use nuclear weapons. And we all understand that this threat is still there. It is still a probability, and this probability may become a reality. Thank God we've been safely through the time when Russia was constantly being provoked to use nuclear weapons or provide a very rigid response. And I guess it's due to the well-balanced position of the Russian authorities that they decided not to cross this red line. But still, we are very close to a situation of the Caribbean crisis, or maybe even closer to this nuclear crisis. Nobody wants to go through the nuclear apocalypse. And again, as of today, it's quite obvious that if we are not to resolve this conflict today, this war may break out even larger extent to impact Europe and European continent, to invoke even more countries. So I'm sure that President Trump is not taking Putin's side. I guess, objectively speaking, Russia and the United States are competing superpowers, just like the United States and India, or the United States and China. Those are big superpowers, big economies with their own interests. And I believe that we simply have to take that into account. Yes, Ukraine received a lot of financing from the EU and the United States, and I'm not going to comment on the actual interests behind expressed by Biden and the United States breaking out this war. I do agree with President Trump when he says that Biden started this war, and it is his fault that this war was started. It could have been avoided. But once again, I believe that the stakes are too high today. If we are not to extinguish this fire now, it will 100% start burning again, covering all of the continent and all of Europe. If you are a reasonable person, you have to avoid it.
Yes, and also Putin said that if Trump was the president then, when the invasion started, it would have never even happened in the first place. So do you agree that it is true, or yeah, if yes, but why?
Совершенно точно.
Absolutely. I absolutely agree. I believe that, I genuinely believe that it would have been much more reasonable to search for a compromise as opposed to starting a war. I made a lot of videos explaining that the United States were one of the beneficiaries of the breakout of Russia-Ukrainian war. Their plan was to weaken Russia through this war. It's just strange that those who started this war did not realize back then that the Russians would probably, they were hoping that the Russians would start a revolution, they would have a kind of a coup inside the country, would change the establishment. They couldn't have happened. And again, Ukraine is so much smaller than Russia. Ukrainian army is so much weaker. How could Ukraine win against a nuclear power? Well, obviously, there is no second guessing. We can't predict what could have happened. A long time ago, President Putin was saying that historically it happened so that the most tense times between Russia and the United States were happening whenever the Democratic Party was in power and not the Republican Party. We'll remember what was happening in 1962. We remember the Caribbean crisis. We remember the Cold War. We remember the resistance and tension between the USA and Russia. Nobody can win from that. I'm more than confident that these two big superpowers could coexist. They could benefit from this cooperation. I'm primarily talking about American people and Russian people. They could all benefit from this cooperation. And you probably know that the rating of President Trump started going up since the moment of negotiations in Alaska, because people want peace. But undoubtedly, there are parties who are interested in starting wars, making money from selling weapons. I'm not going to dwell onto that, but I would say that the dialogue is always better than any war. Dialogue is better than keeping quiet or stopping negotiations, but it's much worse if everyone is not saying anything.
Coming to the point where you said that people who started the war at the time. So in the past, Russia consistently said that the then UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson in 2022 dogged Zelensky out of a peace deal. But Zelensky has continuously rejected these claims. But do you think that in any sort these claims are true?
Я знаю об этом совершенно точно из своих...
I'm absolutely convinced that that was the fact, that Boris Johnson persuaded Zelensky not to accept the peace deal. And even before the trip to London, when Zelensky had a meeting with the head of MI6 more, after this meeting, Zelensky became a completely different person. So this was indeed a milestone for his career. I know many people in the team around Zelensky. He indeed wanted to stop the war and act based on the Minsk agreements before his trip to London. I do not know what was the conversation that happened in London, but we clearly see that the rhetoric changed dramatically. Indeed, Boris Johnson insisted that the war goes on. Zelensky agreed. Trump insists on peace, and Zelensky tries to refuse from that. Zelensky is clearly acting not in the interest of Ukrainian people. And I believe, once again, we do not know what could have happened, but if not due to those fatal decisions made in March 2022, I'm sure so many lives could have been saved. So many people would have survived. So many people wouldn't have to leave and flee Ukraine, and Ukraine would have lost so many territories. Just think of a regular Ukrainian who understands that Ukraine has lost hundreds of thousands of soldiers, hundreds of thousands of lives, most probably more than 1 million by now, more than 1 billion human lives. 20 million Ukrainians have left the country and migrated. We destroyed the Ukrainian economy. All of it could have been avoided if in March 2022 we've signed a peace deal. It's no longer a secret what was on the table offered by Russia. All those suggestions in the Istanbul Treaty are now available, and actually those are much more favorable conditions if we compare it with what is on the table right now, which was discussed by Putin and Trump in Alaska. In a year or two, or maybe even more time, when presidents of Russia, the United States are to discuss yet another phase, if they don't stop it now, the terms will be even worse. Maybe we'll no longer be talking about 6 administrative regions of Ukraine. The situation on the ground evolves dynamically. Even Ukrainian military are saying that if it continues in this manner, it could be worse. 500 Ukrainian soldiers flee every day, and they could run out of people, run out of boots on the ground. The probability that Russia could make it to Kyiv within a year is very probable if it continues in the same manner. Take into account the United States are no longer willing to provide so much financing to Ukraine as they used to. So it's a choice between life and death. It's obvious. And the fact that Zelensky decided to make this blood deal in March 2022 will be judged by our ancestors, by future generations, and everyone will understand that that was a fatal mistake that could cost Ukraine its statehood. Because basically, Ukraine is on the edge of losing its statehood. Economy is no longer existent. Ukraine no longer is capable of paying fees to its retired people. We are no longer to produce anything for the army. We only get the financial aid. And most importantly, Ukrainian people lost every faith in the government, in the establishment, in the army, in Russia, in the West. They no longer trust Russia. They no longer trust the West because the West is no longer offering financing. They are afraid, and all they can hope for is pray.
Yes, Trump even said that, they are not funding Ukraine anymore. And they are buying the weapons, like the Patriot missiles. And even the European Union is actually paying for Ukraine war. So that's also there.
Я уверена, что это так. Еще раз.
Yeah, I'm absolutely convinced that that's the tone we see right now. That's the case. And I know for sure that President Trump is well aware of the scale of corruption happening in Ukraine. This is some kind of a terrible virus that has penetrated every cell of Ukrainian state. Just lately, Zelensky tried to virtually destroy anti-corruption bodies and deprive them of independence. And the West has provided so much financing, about $500 million, starting from 2014 to develop democracy in Ukraine. And we know why Zelensky tried to deprive the anti-corruption bodies of their independence, because they started investigating against Timur Mendic. They had ear-tapped the conversations between him and Zelensky and his team. They discussed potential embezzlement schemes. And that's why Zelensky tried to deprive the anti-corruption bodies of independence. Maybe one day those negotiations, those ear-tapped conversations will be published. Now, Zelensky made one step back. They tried to preserve the independence of anti-corruption bodies, but I know that the actual investigators, people working in the anti-corruption bodies, are criticized a lot, and they are living very hard lives. They are intimidated, they are afraid. But once again, all the numbers of embezzlement are available for President Trump, and he knows for sure that Zelensky has become a billionaire, just like many members of his team and his surroundings, and the scale of crime and embezzlement in Ukraine are incomparable to any other war or military conflict in human history. I'm sure we are to learn many new things and facts if Zelensky fails to agree to a compromise in these peace talks. According to the information I have, and based on my experience, this is what is going to happen. I believe Zelensky will refuse from compromises, and that will be a shock for the rest of the world.
Now let's come to the Trump-Zelensky meet. Trump said that Putin has agreed to security guarantees for Ukraine, but there's no confirmation from Moscow's side. So again, is it like Trump saying that, he'll end all the wars in just one day?
Я думаю, что самая большая трагедия в том, что Зеленский, заручившись поддержкой европейских своих друзей, пытается саботировать эти договоренности. Я опасаюсь, что в ближайшее время мы станем свидетелями жутких провокаций, которые могут произойти в Украине, чтобы сорвать эти переговоры. Я очень этого боюсь и молюсь, чтобы этого не случилось. Я вижу, что у Запада нет, у НАТО нет никакого единого мнения на этот счет на сегодняшний день. Это совершенно профанация. Я понимаю, что ситуация, в которой лидеры европейских держав, самостоятельных государств, мчатся на эту встречу с Трампом и ожидают в коридоре, но она тоже не есть нормальная. Я думаю, для всех людей в Индии, которых вы представляете, это тоже трудно было бы представить, если бы ваш лидер так себя вел, потому что у вас лидер, в вашей стране лидер, который поддерживает национальные интересы вашей страны. На сегодняшний день ситуация в Европе устроена таким образом, в целом во всех европейских странах, что в большинстве власть не представляет интересы народа. Я думаю, что если вы спросите у большинства европейцев, вряд ли они поддерживают то, чтобы выделять огромное количество денег на войну в Украине. Именно поэтому мне кажется, что мы просто должны трезво взглянуть на все, что происходит. И вчерашние переговоры этому доказательство. Это было очень цинично, когда Зеленский смеялся. Один раз сразу за 5 минут сказал Трампу спасибо, и смеялся, когда смотрел на карту, где Украина потеряла, на которой Украина потеряла 20% территории. Это случилось при нем, при его президентстве. Я хорошо знакома с Зеленским и стала его личным врагом после пресс-конференции в 2020 году, когда я его спросила, не жалеет ли он, что он стал президентом, ведь ни одно из его обещаний за год, тогда это был год его президентства, не исполнено. К сожалению, я могу констатировать, что спустя 6 лет он не то что не выполнил ни одно свое обещание предвыборное, он стал самым фатальным президентом в истории Украины. Боюсь, что и не исключаю, что последним, потому что то, что он делает, это, я даже не могу назвать это, знаете, предательством своего народа. Это нечто худшее, потому что он повел нас на смерть в 2022 году, и он никак не может остановиться. Вы знаете, я думаю, что каждый человек заслуживает право на ошибку, право на раскаяние. Если бы сегодня он вышел